have an extraordinary film, Honor Bound, Close Guantanamo Now. Rick will put a link in the chat. This is the fully produced documentary by Robert Corsini. And I urge everyone to save the link, watch the film. It runs about 35 minutes. It's an extraordinary film, which includes interviews with former detainees from Guantanamo, other key interviews, the art of detainees. Please take time to see Honor Bound, which is the ironic slogan that the military uses to welcome people to Guantanamo.
All right. Steve, you're doing the reflection today?
I am. Thank you so much. This Monday, January 15, is Martin Luther King Day. We often highlight the life and work of Martin Luther King, in particular his speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence, which he gave at the Riverside Church on April 4, 1967, 1 year to the day before he was assassinated. Please find his speech. It's lengthy. It is so incisive. So much of it applies today. I want to reflect on his speech with portions of it. It would be worth having an oral reading of the entire speech, but we don't have time for that. But I was so moved in preparing this reflection at how much that Dr. King had to say then about Vietnam applies today in terms of Palestine and Gaza. And as I read some of these passages, please in your mind substitute for Vietnam, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and the reference to the peasants of Vietnam, think of the Palestinians. He said early in his speech, even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war, nor does the human spirit move without great difficulty against all of the apathy of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. If I may say, the condemnation of the United States and its actions in Vietnam applies today in condemning the United States and its actions in supporting Israel. We've chosen to move beyond the prophesizing of smooth patriotism to the high ground of a firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government, and that's true then and now. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose the motto, to save the soul of America. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam, and I would say the Gaza and the West Bank. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the deepest hopes of men and women the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent. He spoke of the burden he felt because of having received the Nobel Prize when he spoke of the brotherhood of man. He believed the privilege and burden of all of us are deemed ourselves bound by allegiances and loyalties which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions. We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of war, for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers. He pondered the madness of Vietnam. And now you will make that interlineation yourselves and search within myself for ways to understand and respond in compassion. My mind goes constantly to the people of that peninsula. I speak now not of the soldiers of each side, not of the ideologies of the Liberation Front, not of the junta in Saigon, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost 3 continuous decades now and longer in Palestine. I think of them too because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution there until some attempt is made to know them and to hear their broken cries. He traces the history of the Vietnamese people's struggle for independence, and we could trace that same history as the struggle of the Palestinians for their sovereignty. He goes on, what do the peasants think we ally ourselves with the landlords? And as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land reform, what do they think as we test out our latest weapons on them? Just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe. Where are the roots of the independent Vietnam we claim to be building? Is it among these voiceless ones? He continues pages later, somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. If we continue, there will be no doubt in my mind and in the mind of the world that we have no honorable intentions in Vietnam. If we do not stop our war against the people of Vietnam, immediately the world will be left with no other alternative than to see this as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game we have decided to play. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. It demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning in our adventure in Vietnam, that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese people. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways. Toward the end, he speaks and quotes the late John F. Kennedy, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Increasingly by choice or accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. And skipping, he speaks of the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism. For the sake of time and turning to our speaker, I will even cut through some of the highlights I wanted to draw attention to. We are confronted with the fierce energy of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. And he ends, and if we will only make the right choice, we will be able to transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of peace. If we will make the right choice, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our world into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. If we will but make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, what could be a better way of commemorating Martin Luther King's birthday than to listen to you can get it online, the entire speech. Thank you so much, Steve. Anthony, would you introduce our guest?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I've heard a lot about Doe from a member of our Quaker meeting, Jane Krause, and I'm so glad to have an opportunity to hear her today. She has an extraordinary record as an Israeli peace activist. She's been working with Coalition of Women for Peace in 2000 and Queers Against the Occupation in 2001. And she's taught at universities. She is amazing. So I'm just thrilled that we're going to have a chance to hear her. And then I'll be able to go back to Jane and say, yes, I've heard her. And I'm so glad that we invited her to be here today.
So hi, everybody. I'm really grateful you invited me. And thank you so much, Steve, for that reflection. I think it's very precise and appropriate. Thank you for that. I don't even know where to start. So we have some time. I brought a lot of visuals and stories to share with you, but this is very informal, and I want you to put questions in the chat, and also I hope to have ample time for questions and conversation later. Let's start with the obvious. I mean, what's happening yesterday and today? This is a historical moment. I've been active with the Israeli peace movement. We haven't been using the word peace for many years. I think now it's getting to the US, but for us, it started even earlier. The peace word was taken away from us. But anti-occupation movement, anti-militarism movement, democracy, let's call it democracy movement. The idea that everybody has rights and should have equal rights, imagine that. I've been active for many, many years, since the 90s, and I'm sure many of you have been likewise active for many years. And I thank you for that. And I remember for many, many marches and rallies and demonstrations, we would have a chant that says, Sharon, Sharon, אל תדאג, עוד נראה אותך בהאג. And this is for Sharon, who was an Israeli prime minister after being minister of defense and a very militant hawk, and saying, Sharon, Sharon, don't you worry, we will see you in The Hague. So, and then we kept changing the name of the general, each and every general. We'll see you in The Hague. We'll see you in The Hague. The Hague is the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, and that's what's happening yesterday and today. You know, there was a proposal by the South African government trying Israel for genocide, which is kind of the highest level of international crime in the international legal system. That is a moment. After so many years of impunity, there is this hope that there is a court that will bring Israel to justice. And for me, as an Israeli and as an Israeli activist, on the one hand, I'm watching it with awe, and on the other hand, with great shame. Of course, being an Israeli is not a cause for great pride these days. And it's very complicated. I don't know, emotionally speaking, I feel very, very confused. Let me show you a couple of pictures. So this is a picture from the early 2000s of a demonstration in a West Bank town called Bidu that was organized by the women of the village against the apartheid wall that was being built at the time on their land by Israel. This is an area under occupation. Israel has built an apartheid wall. Many of you might be familiar with that. That is kind of a grotesque construction that takes away people's land, people's water sources, people's access to towns nearby. Everything it can take, it takes. Not even into the Israeli side. This is not a wall that has two sides. It is just a security wall that goes everywhere. It's like a big snake. It takes it to the settlers, actually. And I like it because there is a young me there, and I feel kind of happy to look at it. I like it because it has this maybe false hope of joint resistance. At the time, it was through the years 2000 through 2005, where we as Israeli activists were invited into those villages to join these popular demonstrations. And also because there is this moment of joy, despite the fact that at least 5 people of the village were killed during those demonstrations, because they were always faced by the Israeli military shooting at us. And it was the first time for me as an Israeli to actually face my own military. I spent 3 years of my life in that Israeli military, and so suddenly being on the other side of their guns and realizing that they can shoot whoever they want to with impunity in a non-violent demonstration. I knew it, but I didn't know it in my body. It's a different type of knowledge. And this is from yesterday in The Hague. I was watching some of the news outside the International Court of Justice. The streets are full with demonstrators that are demonstrating for the Palestinian cause. And you see 75 years without accountability. And I saw this sign and I had to stop. I had to pause the screen and take a screenshot because it says Israelis against genocide. And it says end the occupation in Hebrew and English. And I'm like, oh, my people. And so I'll stop sharing for a moment. Ever since October 7th, which was the Hamas incursion into Israel with the massacre of Israelis that was so horrific, and thousands of people were injured, and 1,300 people were killed, and hundreds were taken hostage, and dozens were raped, and some raped and killed. Horrific moment. What happened in Israeli society was that I think it went into a state of shock, mostly, and a state of trauma. And that allowed our most right-wing government in the history of Israel to go ahead with a very radical revenge campaign, and also accompanied by, I think, a very deep propaganda campaign. I don't know if I want to only blame the government, because in fact its action enjoy very wide support in the Israeli public. But part of this wide support is also because of the complicity of the media, and it's like I try to talk to Israelis in Israel, and it's really hard. And I feel like in the last 3 months, this is what I've been trying to do. I was trying to talk to Israelis. I also have my job with the American Foreign Service Committee, and I'll tell you about it in a few minutes. But in my private life, I was trying to reach out to my movement, to the people I've been active with for so many years. And they were like, yeah, you're right, we need a ceasefire, but what do you expect? There is this feeling like the attack on Gaza was inevitable, which of course I do not agree with. And of course not in the way it was done, or is being done as we speak. So organizing among Israelis was really very important. And in the first week after the October 7 attack, we managed to put out a petition of Israelis for an immediate ceasefire that collected 1,700 signatures. People were trying to go out to the street and demonstrate, mainly Palestinian citizens of Israel inside Israel. They were faced with extreme repression. legal repression and police brutality and on all levels. And it has reached the point now when anyone who is posting anything on Facebook that shows support for the idea of ceasefire, I'm not talking about support for Hamas, is seen as supporting Hamas. And we have hundreds of people who were indicted for support of terrorism because they put a green heart on Facebook, or because they shared a post about a ceasefire demonstration or things like that. The leadership of the Palestinian minority in Israel were arrested and released, but definitely targeted just for trying to organize public events. Event spaces where events were about to take place were threatened and closed down. So really very, people lost their jobs. Students were suspended from university, doctors from hospitals, just for not supporting, or publicly not supporting, the war in Gaza. I think this is loosening up a little bit right now. I think there is a lot more space for a debate in the Israeli public right now. I see that all around me suddenly. There is also a new petition that came out with 700 signatures to support the South Africa bid for charging Israel with genocide. 700 people in an entire country. You can imagine that's not a lot. One of them is a member of parliament, Ofer Kasif, and now they're collecting signatures in order to kick him out of the parliament because of joining this very petition. That's not a lot of support, but still 700 people, and some of them are in The Hague demonstrating. So what has the AFSC been doing since October 7? Let me share with you the same screen again. That's what I want to share, really. I want to share with you our page on the afsc.org website. We have a page dedicated to what's happening now in Gaza and Israel, and it has a lot of resources that you can see. And some of them I really recommend reading about our humanitarian support now in Gaza. Now, some of you may know the American Foreign Service Committee has been present in Gaza since 1948. During the war in 1948, which is the Nakba, or the Palestinian catastrophe, what the Israelis call the War of Independence, which was a civil war, after which 700,000 Palestinians became refugees. Refugees from inside what then became the Israeli state moved to refugee camps all around the borders of this new state, and many of them in the Gaza Strip, which was at the time under Egyptian rule. And the American Foreign Service Committee were asked by the now then budding UN that just started after World War II to create the new infrastructure for refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. So in fact, AFSC has been in Gaza since 1948. I'm proud to tell you that a year and a half later, unlike many international humanitarian organizations, the AFSC has decided to step away from that work and to actually, give the keys back to the UN that later formed UNRWA, which is the UN refugee support agency. And the reason why was because the AFSC said this is a human-made disaster. These refugees should be allowed to go back home, to go back to their land and their property, and building more infrastructure to keep them in the Gaza Strip is actually wrong. It's facilitating an ongoing wrong. And I'm proud of that decision. I think it was the right decision in 1949. And unfortunately, these refugees stayed in Gaza until this very day. 70% of, I think, the people of Gaza, which are 2.3 million people, are refugees from inside Israel. In fact, they are my neighbors, the people who actually should live with me, next to me in Israel, if I were to live in Israel now. The AFSC has a program in Gaza. It's a youth program, and we have 3 staff members. And ever since the beginning of this horrendous attack, We've been getting sporadic reports from some of them. They've been running for their lives. They've been running for their lives daily and then struggling to remain alive by getting food and then trying to distribute food to others as they do that, which is very noble. So you can read more about their stories here on the website. And you can also donate to the emergency response. We have trucks coming in from Egypt with emergency supplies into Gaza. We also have the Action Hour. It's here every Friday, actually, today. Maybe it's the same time of your meeting. It starts at 9 a.m. Pacific. We have an hour where we come together and call Congress people and our representatives and write letters, and you can join it here or encourage others to join. It's, I think, very inspiring. And I want to talk to you about this resource because my colleague Davi, who is here on the call with us, has been working on it for the last, I don't know, couple of months, and it is quite unique, and I'm very proud of this work. So let me switch now. So this is a tweet on a platform used to be called Twitter by Rifat in Gaza. And it is a picture of a shell. It's a picture of a tank shell that was fired on a UN school where Rifat's children used to go to. And Rifat is showing us this picture. It was put online in November, and it is all about showing us that it is made in the US. And this tells us something not just about the fact that shells are made in the US, we already knew that, but the fact that Palestinians in Gaza really want us to know that. And they really want us to take action about that. And this is meaningful to them to check who is responsible for killing them. This is Rifat on the right, and Rifat has been a long friend of the AFSC, collaborating in a project called Light in Gaza. I really recommend finding the book. The book is actually free online now. If you go on Haymarket, you can get Light in Gaza. It's short stories from people in Gaza. Rifat was a very well-distinguished poet and writer, Palestinian poet and writer, who was actually killed in an Israeli airstrike shortly afterwards. I don't know if you saw that in some of the demonstrations against the attack on Gaza. A poem that he wrote shortly before he was killed, a few weeks before he was killed, is here on the left. If I must die, you must live to tell my story. To buy a piece of cloth and some strings, to create a kite. So there is this image of a kite that will be produced from his life. And that became very meaningful in the demonstrations. I know I was in a demonstration in the Bay Area last month, outside Google actually, asking Google to step away from a big contract with the Israeli government, where we had a die-in, and then all the people who were playing dead rose up from the dead with big white kites. And I see the white kites everywhere now in demonstrations for Palestine. So he became kind of a symbol. So that's why I wanted to show the tweet from Rifat, our friend, this inspirational poet who was killed in this attack. And at the same time, know that there are many, many such tweets coming from Gaza, trying to tell us, hey, these are American weapons being used. So that was actually one of our motivations for this project. And I'm jumping to the end. This is already the product that you can find on that page I showed you online. And maybe soon in the Q&A, Davi can tell us more if you want. It's up to you about what it is like to spend every day hours and hours just reading through all the reports from Gaza, all the reports from the IDF spokesperson and different Israeli publications, to actually find out all the weapon systems used in Gaza. And the idea is for us to put these companies out there. None of them are really surprising. It's not as if we are, telling you something you don't know. But we are really tracking in this resource, and you can click on any one of these names to read the whole story, where these weapons were used. What do we know about it? All from public sources, nothing really is secret. How they were used, how they are still being used, and how the next $14 billion, $14.3 billion in weapons to be sent to Israel will be used to produce more of that same harm. So why do we put out this list? Some of these companies, this is an old slide. This is a slide from a previous attack on Gaza over the last 20 years, more so in the last 16 years. It's like every other year, there's a big attack on Gaza with thousands of people killed. Nothing like we see now. Now we see 10,000 children killed, yes. But Northrop Grumman, of course, makes the missiles that are killing people. But at the same time, it also shows you on the left, like what Northrop Grumman is doing on the US-Mexico border. What does it do with surveillance inside the US with ICE? Another company, Elbit Systems, the largest Israeli military weapons company that is, of course, providing almost all of the weapons to the Israeli military, including drones and killer drones, but also surveillance on the US-Mexico border and a lot of military activity in the US. General Dynamics. On the right-hand side, on the top again, an old slide. This is when there was this whole controversy around the unaccompanied children who were separated from their families and detained, again, on the US border. This was facilitated by General Dynamics. On the bottom, this is, of course, the US-Mexico border wall, not the West Bank wall, that General Dynamics helps monitor and surveil. And on the left top corner, Gaza, General Dynamics provides a lot of weapons to the Israeli military, including the infamous 155 millimeter artillery shells that are infamous because Israel has been using tens and tens and tens of thousands of these in an unprecedented way on the Gaza Strip, so much so that they ran out of shells, and the US had to send them emergency supplies so they can keep shelling. And these shells are notorious for being very indiscriminate. So when you bomb a urban, highly densely populated area, there is actually no chance for you to be precise with it. They are not precise weapons. So they're in a way a war crime just by using them on an urban populated area. You are not supposed to use them at all. And some of the demonstrations, some of them are old demonstrations, some are new. This is Lockheed Martin and Boeing. Recent demonstrations against Boeing were in St. Louis and Seattle. This is from St. Louis and Seattle just a couple of weeks ago. And stating the obvious, in Southern California, we have huge collection of many of these weapons companies. We have a map of the main 6 weapons companies in the US and their locations, and there are plenty of those all around us. So good places for demonstrations. And we wanted to create this resource to allow people to take action and to hold these companies accountable and to make it more public that this is really not an Israeli war, it is a US war. We're all looking now at the International Court of Justice with the hope that they will file for that they will actually put an injunction on Israel and demand an immediate ceasefire and opening up of the borders for humanitarian relief for the millions of people who are now suffering from hunger and thirst and disease. And because somebody has to step in. But once such an injunction is put by the court, the US can still veto any action by the UN Security Council, and they might. And the US has vetoed a decision by the UN Security Council for an immediate ceasefire. So diplomatically, the US is responsible for what is happening, but also directly, with its supply of weapons and technologies and support on many different ways, including actual troops on the ground. We don't have American troops fighting inside Gaza, as far as I know, but there are generals who sit in the headquarters in Tel Aviv and support very closely the war effort for the Israeli military. So one thing to do is for us as activists to go out there and make it public and demand that our own government stops supporting this. Another thing that we can do is of course divest. This is one of my favorite slides because it shows that divestment is a form of investment. That our investment, it can be also emotional investment or the ideological investment, but very much so money investment in the military industry, in the what is called the military security surveillance prison policing industrial complex. Yes, it's no longer just military, is actually deadening. It's taking away from our life energy. And the same funds and the same time and the same emotional commitment given to other causes is actually what can best sustain us as wherever we are in our communities. So how can we do that? So I want to show you, this is the AFSC's investment policy statement that was revised in 2021. I'm very proud of that too. I think we are really kind of trying to create some new norm for others, but a similar policy statement can be taken by any institution. It doesn't have to be a faith organization. It can be any small group that has any kind of funds that invests somewhere. But of course, it can be faith organizations, it can be universities, it can be cities, it can be, we can move to have this similar policy anywhere we go. So first and foremost, I would say when we invest money in the stock exchange, it probably should not be invested in Wall Street altogether. It's best to invest in our own communities in different ways. And there are now ways of doing that through impact investment that is socially responsible. But if you are invested somewhere in Wall Street, it's good to have a policy statement such as this. Investment should not be made in companies which consistently, knowingly, and directly facilitate and enable state violence and repression, war and occupation, and or severe violations of international law and human rights. This includes, but is not limited to, companies involved in the following business activities, and here we include prisons, not just private prisons, but all prisons, industries of mass incarceration, electronic monitoring, companies which use prison labor, and then B, security, defense, and military industries, including border security, mass surveillance, militarized policing. And finally, we added here companies that facilitate and enable violations of international and human rights as part of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian and Syrian lands and or part of Israeli apartheid. It's doable. You can actually still invest. That's my job actually for the AFSC as part of the Action Center for Corporate Accountability. We work with activists that try to expose companies and hold them accountable. And we work with investors and try to tell them, actually, you can do better. You can find ways to withdraw your investment from state violence and for human rights violations. And one of the tools that we offer to do that is called Investigate. And I encourage you to check it out. The URL or the link is right here on the bottom right, investigate.info. This is a database of hundreds of companies that are involved in the Israeli occupation, but also in mass incarceration in the United States, international, multinational corporations that are involved in private prisons abroad, or in the militarization of the US-Mexico border and mass surveillance inside the US. Check it out. It also allows you to scan investments. So if you have a list of holdings of your own or of an institution that you work with, like a church or a I would say, your place of work, any place like that, you can actually upload it here to the database and find out what you're exposed to. And I'm not saying that you will always find these institutions amenable to our request to divest, but if we don't ask, that would never happen. Yes, so we should ask them to divest. And finally, the last campaign I want to share with you, of course, you're familiar with. I know that ICUJP is a member of Apartheid-Free Communities. Welcome. I'm very happy about it. And what does it mean? We have a pledge, as you well know, apartheid-free.org. We have all this information, a pledge of our commitment to opposing all forms of racism, bigotry, discrimination, and oppression, and joining others in working to end all support to Israel's apartheid regime, settler colonialism, and military occupation. So this is a pledge. How do we lean into the pledge? What does it mean to make it real? And I will stop sharing my screen because I think this is what we really need to try and discuss among ourselves. One idea, a very simple one, is to have our own smaller communities or even businesses we work with, or congregations that we belong to, or friends meetings that we're part of, join the pledge. As we all know, it's not easy because that means talking to people, and that means getting them on board. That means getting them to care and getting them to know more. And that is a lot of work. But we can help you with that. We have a lot of resources about Israeli apartheid and films to show. We can help with bringing speakers. We have a speakers bureau. There are all sorts of things we can help with to get more and more different congregations and communities to join this growing network of communities across the world. It's an international movement. In the US now we have 220 signatories, including Jewish congregations and Muslim congregations and Buddhist congregations and Quaker congregation, and it has been growing rapidly, of course, since October 7th. Another thing you can do if you're already a signatory or if not, is to look around for what does it mean to divest? If we are withdrawing our own support, this is about focusing on our own accountability. It is not about distancing ourselves from what's happening there. It's actually about tracking our own connections to it. Where in our own community do we support this? We support it through our tax monies. So yeah, call your representative and ask them to withdraw their support from this supplemental $14.3 billion in military aid to Israel. That's preposterous, and call for a ceasefire, that's for sure. But beyond that, where do the institutions around us or our church and so on, where do they invest their funds? Maybe we can do something about that and do it publicly and do it collectively. Do it in a way that educates other people and takes a stance out in the world. Are there military industries next to us? I can give you the link to that map, or maybe you know better than I do, where are the military industries next to you? That's a good place to organize. That's a good place to try and educate maybe college students not to go and work for these industries. There are all sorts of things we can do to highlight the fact that this is a genocide going on and that these factories are producing the means to continue it as we speak every day. So there's a lot of work for us to do, and I welcome you in asking for any kind of support that you would need from us in making that happen. And I will pause here. I didn't really look at the chat until now, and I'm really curious to hear more from you and to see if you have any questions or thoughts. And I also want to introduce my colleague here, Davi, who is a brilliant researcher. She put together almost single-handedly this resource about the US military industries. So, she can also answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much. Packed with compassion and information. We're very, very grateful. I want to take advantage of the fact that you are Israeli, that you have friends, maybe family in Israel. And to come down, we've had, 10 or so programs since October 7. We had one on how to speak to friends and family about these issues. And I'd love your insights because you alluded to this, but to dig a little deeper and to help us because I'm Jewish. I have Jewish friends. I have Jewish family members. There's a kind of blind spot you would expect from Jews to understand what's going on, and instead there's a nationalistic blinders have come over. So I think you know what I'm alluding to.
Yeah.
Are there steps in talking to friends and family and colleagues and entry points to open them? I mean, the information you've given is overwhelming. We know this, we've known it for decades, but how do you, in the current setting, talk to your friends and family?
Yeah, so we worked on a similar resource for the FSC page that I showed you, and you can click there and find it. And my colleagues were working on it and created this beautiful page, and and it has a lot of good and powerful resources. And they asked for my opinion, and I read through it, and I said, well, you're missing one section in this guide. The guide said, 1, do this, 2, do this, 3, do this. Said you're missing section 0, which is sometimes you cannot. And we all know that also in US politics, talking to your friends and family that are Trump supporters, yes? You want to stay in loving relationship with people, even if you think they are crazy, So it goes both ways. So first of all, I would say we really want to heal those relationships, and we want them to understand us. I want my family not to think that I'm a crazy traitor that supports Hamas. But sometimes it's impossible. So I want to start with that. And when you realize that we sometimes cannot change people, especially when they are part of some mass distortion. I don't even know what to call it. In Israel, this is a situation of mass hysteria and triggering some very deep historical trauma. And people feel very deeply unsafe. I mean, my sister told me that ever since October 7th, she had put in her mamad, which is like the secure room. All Israeli houses have to have a secure room for rockets. She has put knives in there because she has no other weapons in the house. So there'll be a knife, because if people come in to murder her and burn down the house like they did in October 7th, she will have a knife. Now, she knows that she doesn't know how to use the knife and it will not help her. And she also knows that nothing like that will happen where she lives, which is a very safe area. But it doesn't matter. She needed to put some knives in. And that's my sister, who is kind of a very peaceful person who's never had such fantasies before. But that's what's happening. And we also need to remember that Israel is not the US. It's a small country. It has been under missile attacks ever since October 7th, almost every day. So people are not back to normal lives. And almost the entire population of Jewish Israelis is connected very deeply to people who are in the military, and people are killed in the military every day in Gaza. So we cannot compare it to the total devastation and catastrophe happening in Gaza. But this is not life as normal. It's constantly triggering. So if you can't talk to people, what do? You listen. So the best thing you can do, and this is only when you can do it, you talk to your loved ones and you just try and listen. and maybe share some compassion to them. And maybe at some point they will be willing and able to share some compassion with Palestinians. That's all we have.
Rick,
Yep. So, Dev, thank you very much for sharing that the whole presentation, and you covered a lot of important things that I think this organization seriously should look at, and a lot of things that are the people on this call should talk to their constituent organizations about. There's a link for the Apartheid-Free Coalition and all that information. If please take that to the groups that you are involved with outside of ICUJP, and we can grow this coalition. We can make a concerted voice for the progressive community that is standing up for something very important. Also, too, one of the reasons I want to talk to you about the Corporate Accountability Project is that there have been some really good examples of fighting against predatory capitalism by, a group of concerned citizens has really worked. There was a network called how was it? I can't remember what they were called. But they were going to put up this really John Kerry propaganda piece that basically lied about everything during his presidential run. And it turned out that because of putting pressure on, because it was a public company and putting pressure on the mutual funds that were managing this company, their stock price went down millions of dollars in a week, less than a week. B, they did not show that documentary. And we tend to feel like we're trapped by predatory capitalism instead of knowing that we are its biggest, we can be the biggest change that they will encounter if we coordinate and if we make a considered effort. So, yeah, I really like the fact that you guys are looking at corporate accountability in that way. And if you have any suggestions on how we can go forward with it as well.
Thank you so much, Rick. You use so many valuable things. Like I don't want to. I want to say that first of all that we can help. My job description is to help with corporate accountability campaigns, and in my experience working with many dozens of such campaigns over the last 20 years, surprisingly, they almost all are successful. I mean, this is something that is not very well known, but with this unfortunate fact that we live in predatory capitalism, as we call it, and we're surrounded by corporations that have a tremendous amount of economic and political power and influence, this is terrible. And at the same time, we need to recognize that corporations are not people, and they don't have an ideology, and they don't have a backbone, and they don't care about anything but their bottom line. And these kind of machines that are programmed to only care about their bottom line means that if we can affect their bottom line, or if we can create a viable future risk to their bottom line, they will fold right away, immediately, again and again and again. Also on Palestine. Palestine seems like such a hopeless issue. And yet, over the last 11 years, I was involved in many different campaigns, asking corporations to divest from the Israeli occupation and succeeding one after the other. What it takes, as you said, Rick, is collective, concentrated effort. You cannot just do it yourself. I mean, you can all decide you don't want to shop for this thing, you don't want to buy this product because this company is doing this and that. You don't want to invest yourself in this and that company. That's great. all of these individual actions are, good for aligning yourself, I don't know, with your spiritual growth. And in order to make any impact on the companies in the world, we have to do it with others. And we don't even have to do much, but we have to take it to the public sphere. So divestment, boycott, corporate accountability campaigns, all of these things are really working. It's just that we need to do it with others. And again, we can help you identify targets, we can help you put together a good strategic plan for a campaign, and we can help you support you during such a campaign. But it has to be a campaign.
Great. Dave.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm always surprised when I see the breadth and the depth of the work of AFSC. And it's been going on since I was in high school, 1957 to 1961, and we had a student from Northern Europe in our class, and his presence was enabled by I'm pretty sure that was the AFSC. So it's amazing, and I can't say enough good about it, except that I'm very grateful. I wanted to go to Steve Rohde's reflection, which I thought was brilliant. The timing was brilliant. The analogies, which I had not thought of, and once Steve brings them to our attention, they seem so clear. My thought about about Martin Luther King's Riverside Church speech is that he never condemned the National Liberation Front of Vietnam for taking up arms to oppose their occupation and oppression. He didn't do that. He was a man of peace. I'm not sure if he was 100% pacifist. So so in the course of this whole speech, he, to my knowledge, never once condemned the National Liberation Front for taking up arms. And my question, and I realize that I'm addressing a pacifist organization, and our organization is, I would guess, primarily pacifist. Many of the discussions about the current situation in Palestine, Israel, begin. The first paragraph is a condemnation of Hamas and the Islamic Jihad for their military action, and I think we have to separate the military action from the allegations of war crimes. They begin with a condemnation, and I would like to know and hear from other people as well as Dov and Davi. Do the Palestinian people have any right to armed struggle to address their occupation and their oppression, which has been going on for over 100 years? Do they have? Does a people like the Palestinian people have any right to armed struggle? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I have two thoughts about that, and I'm of course a pacifist myself, so I condemn all use of weapons and all use of violence by everybody for whatever goals. I don't think it produces any good in the world. One thought is that when I first got to the US, which was 2011, I was already doing research on corporations, and I was part of a project in Israel called Who Profits from the Occupation that was trying to expose corporations that were profiting. Same kind of thing. I've been doing it for a while. And wherever I went, people wanted to debate BDS. I don't know if you know about the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions, and pro and against, and support. And they went through the language and they were debating it. It was all very academic. And I was kind of struck by that. I was trying to tell people, the Palestinian civil society that put out the call for this non-violent type of resistance, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, they didn't ask you to endorse it. They never asked you to endorse it. It is not yours to endorse. This is a call coming from the oppressed, and they're asking you to take action. Now, you can say, I don't want to take action. You can say, I can only do this one little thing in a response for this call for action. All I can do is do this one little thing. That's what I can do. Or I can organize and try and do a little more, but I'm not sure I will be able to, or that it will be successful. Great. Or, yes, I want to do whatever. But nobody asks you to endorse it. Nobody asks you to denounce it. All this is what we call resolutionary activism. It's not revolutionary, it's resolutionary. It's like we're debating things to death. And the request to denounce Hamas is used as a way to silence people. That's how it's being used. It is being used by saying, if you don't denounce Hamas, then we don't want to hear you. But what it actually means is that you have to start with taking a strong stance against Palestinian resistance in order to be even allowed to speak. And I oppose that. Also as a pacifist, I oppose that. Now, I am not a supporter of Hamas. I'm a Jubo, which is like a Jewish, Buddhist, lesbian feminist. And Hamas is a fundamentalist Muslim organization. Not necessarily, you can see that I'm not a Hamas supporter, and Hamas would never support me either. So there's no chance of that happening. A good quote, I think, would be from Mohammed Baraka. Mohammed Baraka is one of the leaders of the Palestinian minority inside the state of Israel. And he even used to be a member of the Israeli parliament. He's retired now, but he had something called the shadow government. There is a shadow government of Palestinians inside Israel. And he is the head of that organization. One of the people who were arrested actually early on after October 7th. As an attempt to silence him. And so when they couldn't go out to the street, they held some kind of an online event. And in that online event, he said the following thing. He said, nothing in the 75 years of Zionism, I'm quoting from memory, this is not what he actually said, but something along these lines. Nothing in 75 years of Israeli Zionist Jewish supremacy and Zionist dispossession and colonization of Palestine and massacres and violence, none of it can justify the violence of October 7th, the Hamas violence of October 7th. And he said nothing in the atrocities by Hamas in October 7 can justify what Israel is doing now. There is no justification. And I like that. It's too symmetrical. I don't believe that he thinks the situation is symmetrical. It's not. But there's something about it, about the inability to justify atrocities by atrocities. So that's a very important principle. And this comes from a Palestinian leader, wise leader. And the last thing I want to say, of course, there is an internationally recognized right for the oppressed to use arms. Yes, this is international law. I don't like international law. According to international law, some wars are legal. According to international law, the Israeli occupation was legal until it became illegal because occupations have to be temporary, and it has been so many years. So legality, it's a very, very limited tool. Yes, there is such a right. And on a political level, I will say Palestinians have tried everything and are still trying everything. And many amongst them are very inspirational, nonviolent leaders. They are usually in prison or killed. But these are the people I work with. And I see myself as part of the BDS movement because the call for boycott, divestment, and sanction is a call to people like us who want to use nonviolent means in order to influence and try and stop these atrocities from happening. And the last comment, I'm sorry, I know I have a lot of thoughts about that, but the last comment is even international law that justifies the use of violence by the oppressed, by the people who are dispossessed, by the people who are under military occupation, they do not justify violence against civilians. International law has a clear distinction between combatants and civilians, and unfortunately, I cannot think of one war in the last century that respected those distinctions. So that is the case, and especially not in Israel, Palestine, where so many civilians are being killed every day.
Wow, that was really, really good. Dana? Daria.
Hi. Yeah, this is Donna. I just want to thank Dov Butt for attending this. I mean, the resources that you have provided are super helpful. My question is about BDS laws, and I'm from California. I live in a very privileged area. However, it seems like our politicians are continuing to pass laws to incriminate any organization or any company or even individuals who support a BDS or act on it. I know many people who contract with the government or even work as subcontractors with school districts or very minimal low level not jobs or positions, nothing with large scale, that are being required to sign that they are not going to support BDS and that they will never speak against Israel. So what do you think is the best way to combat such laws that are being implemented in the US and throughout the world?
Yeah, it's just the tip of the iceberg. There is a concentrated effort for many years, and this is done by hegemonic forces. That's why it's so hard to resist it, to silence any talk on Palestine. You cannot speak for Palestinian rights with impunity in this country. And in other countries as well. The US is one of the worst, but France is very, very hard. Germany is even harder. Students who organize in Students for Justice in Palestine in universities across the US are penalized for it. Some of these chapters were completely banned in universities, and some very, very liberal universities. And some of them were put on blacklists, like Canary Mission. I don't know if you heard about it. There are blacklists of students that are then highlighted for, I don't know, all sorts of restrictions of movement by Israel. So if they are Palestinian students, they really fear getting on this list. They're afraid they will not get a job later on. There are specific cases of students, like in Irvine, who participated in actions on the university, and then they were actually expelled from the university. Students are very afraid because they're young and very vulnerable to these things. And I'm talking about in the US, yes? Not to say anything about Palestinians who were victims of hate crimes over the last few months across the US. It's very scary. So the tip of the iceberg is also all sorts of actions in the legislative sphere. And BDS is kind of like it's really hard to tell people what BDS is and what it isn't, because the disinformation and misinformation campaign around it is so powerful that it actually took over. So much so that sometimes I just don't use it altogether because it will trigger all these conversations about BDS. I think are a waste of time sometimes. I tell people, well, these are these corporations that support oppression and dispossession in Palestine. Don't invest in them. And they totally agree. until they say, but isn't that BDS? I say, yeah, it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. So BDS is not illegal. There are laws in many states across the US that are anti-BDS laws, but many of them are just declaratory, this resolutionary politics that says BDS is bad, BDS is anti-Semitic, BDS. It was passed because it came upon from a strong lobby, and legislators didn't feel like they could say anything against it because they would be targeted, and it passed. It means nothing. It's also false. It's not true. BDS is not anti-Semitic. BDS is a call by Palestinian civil society for us, people of conscience around the world, to use non-violent tools such as boycotts, divestment, or sanctions, whatever works for us. There is no clear indication what or on what, until Israel stops its illegal occupation and allows for the basic internationally recognized rights of the Palestinian people. How can you disagree with that? I don't think anyone in their right mind can disagree with that. But the campaign is powerful. In some states, the legislation also goes against, it says boycott the boycotters or divest from the divestors. So the state should not invest in companies that divested from Israel, and the state should not have contracts with individuals or companies that boycott Israel. It is totally impossible to implement those laws, actually. And it was tried in 3 states. It was also taken down by appeals because they are unconstitutional, because it is our freedom of speech to decide what we boycott. So this is a very, very quick answer to a very long question. My recommendation is to remind people that boycotts are a tried and true American strategy, It was actually, boycott and divestment specifically were actually developed as nonviolent tools in this country. And I would want to brag that Quakers invented divestment. We have tracked records going to the 19th century, showing that Quakers were the first to divest from, of course, weapons and alcohol and things like that. So there is a huge legacy and a very proud legacy of us using these tools of economic aligning our economic activities with our heart and with our spiritual beliefs.
Oh, thank you for that, Aisha.
I was going to get off because I have a 9 o'clock class and I just couldn't. So I have a lot of emotion. Dove, it's so good to see you again. And just connecting with you on Facebook has been a real solace to me during this war. And I realize I don't talk about this a lot. I write. I have a lot of emotion. I talk with people that I feel connected to and safe, but I don't talk a lot. I've actually been in public conversations where people whisper rather than talk in their regular volume of voice. They're afraid. And I haven't spoken. I don't think mine has been about fear, but my emotions are so big that I think I don't even have language for it. So I think an important part of our work is also creating spaces to be able to safely move some of that emotion. I know that's important for me. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when this started, I couldn't figure out what was happening inside of me. I was, like you were saying in the very beginning, Dove, there was something you said in the beginning that I thought that was it. I was challenged to hold such complexity, so many things at once, as if I could not feel for a community that lost 1,200 people in 24 hours. 24 hours, the level of shock and trauma is hard for me to grasp. And I can have compassion for that. And I can hold horror for both, and compassion and rage and huge emotions about what's happening in Palestine. And I think it's like, how do people hold both at the same time? And yet it's really opened me. It's grown me to really hold both at the same time. And what do I expect of people who have been through that, who've been brainwashed every day?
Hmm.
What do I expect? Last thing, what about Palestinians using violence? There was a Central American activist, I don't remember who it was, but he said, unless you are here, who are you to judge what we do and what we do for our liberation? You're not here. Mm-hmm. And I have to respect that. I know Palestinians have tried since 1948 to find nonviolent ways to work this out. It's not working out for them. And at the same time, last thing, I can recognize the soul cost of that violence on October 7th. That the cost of the soul is immeasurable. But the cost of the soul, the Israeli nation, for what's happening now, they have no clue what's coming back. So I'll stop there. I'm so grateful to have a space where I can finally say something. That's it. Boom.
Well, thank you, Aisha. Anthony?
I want to just thank you. I really appreciate what the AFSC has done, but on so many levels, and it's helpful to me because I do care deeply about this issue. During Operation Cast Lead, I got arrested in Senator Feinstein's office because I just couldn't bear the idea that we were sending all these weapons to Israel at a time when, they were slaughtering Gazans, and that was only 1,200. Now it's 20 times worse, and I just am appalled. But so I'm really grateful for the conversation today. In my own Quaker meeting, we're not in unity about how to respond. I feel somewhat alone, although there's a number of us who share the same views about what we need to do with ceasefire and ending the embargo and ending the arms to Israel. There are a lot of us who feel that way, but there's a deep division in our meeting because we have some Jewish members who feel very strongly, that we shouldn't take a stand. We're being political. It's divisive, so we shouldn't do anything. And that just cuts me to the core because Quakers have always taken a stand. We've taken a stand on the side of peace, reconciliation. And so I'm just so grateful, Dove. And you're a courageous, amazing person, and I really appreciate all that you're doing. And I can't thank you enough for being here today.
Steve, you're the last person with your hand up I wanted to speak to. I believe you've already spoken once, so could you just make it quick? Because it's 1:15.
Why don't you speak first, and then I'll
Okay, I wanted to say, Aisha, what you quoted the Latin American leader in saying, "Who are you to judge?" There's this group called, I don't remember what the organization was, but their magazine was called Win, and it was the newsletter of the nonviolent movement during the Central American wars. And they came out supporting the Sandinistas in the Sandinista uprising against Somoza. And they said, why are we, the voice of the nonviolent movement, supporting the Sandinistas? And it's because we're not there. It's not for us to sit in our comfortable homes and and say this. And would say that about somebody mentioned the fact that people are forced to sign a I won't support BDS before they are allowed to get jobs. It's like in the 50s, they had this loyalty oath. You had to sign this loyalty oath to the United States. Now you have to sign the loyalty oath to the state of Israel. I wanted to say that, you know, I really, 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 really do appreciate your saying that the whole you have to condemn Hamas before you're allowed to speak is a way of intimidating us, and that it's just fundamentally unjust. And I just really appreciate that. I think I will condemn Hamas for October 7th after the person I'm talking to who's ordering me to condemn Hamas condemns the United States and Israel as terrorist states before they speak up for the Jews who were killed on October 7th. Well, I wanted to ask, can you use the pain that, I believe it was your sister that had the knives, and use that pain. Yes, you're so upset. You're so scared for your life because of October 7th. Can you use that pain to understand what people, Palestinians in Gaza, are feeling? You know, because of all the violence that's been levied against them.
Yeah, I think that's the enlightened way forward. Yes, to feel that pain, to feel it all the way that Aisha is feeling it, to let it be felt and be expressed, and to mourn together and to cry together, and to open up to understanding that we're mourning 1,300 people killed. That makes it easier maybe to understand the pain of losing tens of thousands, 30,000 people. And I also want to add another thing. I know that we're running out of time, and I see there are two more hands, but about BDS, which is really, it really is a call for us to go beyond condemning or taking stands or having opinions. We're not from the moon. We're not objective. You know, Americans or white Americans have the tendency to think that they are coming here and they will offer a solution for the Middle East. And what is your preferred solution? Like, who are you? Who the fuck are you? Sorry, excuse my language.
It's okay.
You're not from the moon. The invitation is for us to delineate our own complicity. How are we connected to that in our actual monetary connections, you know, in our activities in the world, in who we are, in our, you know, my uncle who is an arms dealer, I'm just making this up. These are real connections, and this is where we need to start our political activism from. And when we say capital ties to Israeli apartheid, that's what it means. You know, it doesn't matter if you denounce Hamas or don't denounce Hamas. Do you support Hamas materially? Or do you support Israel materially every day? So we're already on a side. It's not that it's different. We're already on a side. We're already supporting Israel every day. And what we're asking for is to step away from that support because it is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Steve?
Very quickly, I don't want to let Dave Plannon's question go unanswered, and maybe we need a session, Dave, if you could bring in some speakers. What are the limits of self-defense, and what are the limits of armed struggle? We've got to explore this question. None other than South Africa, the ANC engaged in violent struggle to fight apartheid. What was the nature of that armed struggle there and elsewhere? Are there limits to armed struggle? It cannot open the door to rape and other violations of law and international law. So I'm just saying this to the group, to Dave. We need deeper exploration of the. We are a group that says religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. And what are the limits of our own mission? And there are limits to self-defense, and there must be limits to armed struggle. I don't know what those are. We need to explore that. I personally want to thank Dav so much, but I do see Ruby's hand up as well.
Yeah. Ruby?
I remember you, Doug. We marched together. I haven't been able to get on screen. And Carol Francis, I want to thank you for keeping this open. I'm kind of behind here in the physical. So, but I'm so glad that this has come together. And Aisha, please call me. We have some other things to participate in to know that next year this won't happen, because this was such a great meeting that it gives more attention to Guantanamo. And as it gives more attention, we'll be able to give ourselves as a group. And thank you for clarifying about Gaza. I got more information from you just from talk. And Steve, that was a great reflection and a perfect timing. And thank you. And how did I just get on now? Thank you.
So this is, thank you, though. It was really, really, really wonderful.
And to our audience seeing this recording, ICUJP depends on the kindness of friends and strangers to support our work. If you're able to make a small donation, we have a small paid staff where we struggle to keep our work going. We put on events like the Close Guantanamo Rally and 50 webinars a year. Please support us as generously as you can. Thank you, everyone. Be safe and be well, and